Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Here are the stories we're following today.
As we start a new trading month, we begin with a report Wall Street's been waiting for all week, the August jobs report. Net hiring is expected to slow to a fresh post-2020 low. The median forecast is for a gain of 170,000 jobs. Bloomberg's Michael McKee has a preview.
Barring a surprise, the payrolls report is forecast to show a continuing slowdown in hiring during August. While this week's JOLTS report showed the number of openings remains elevated, monthly jobs creation has been trending lower. Companies aren't laying off workers, but they are cutting back on hiring as they wait to see whether recession forecasts come true. Fed officials also want to see if unemployment starts to rise. So far, it's remained near historic lows, even given the rise in interest rates. And, of course, top of mind for everyone will be average hourly earnings. Thursday's incomes report suggested wage gains are finally cooling as demand for workers eases. Michael McKee, Bloomberg Daybreak.
All right, Mike, thank you. Well, the economy is also in focus in Asia. Beijing has announced a raft of fresh measures to stimulate the economy and support its currency. China's central bank is trimming the amount of foreign currency reserves banks are required to hold. That's after authorities announced help for home buyers and plans to expand tax breaks for childcare and education. Bloomberg's Jill Desis has more from Hong Kong.
We haven't seen any kind of big bazooka-style stimulus that China has rolled out, but there has been this drip feed that has been going on for several weeks at this point, and it does seem to be having at least a limited impact on confidence and sentiment.
Bloomberg's Jill Desis notes the stocks in China closed the week with a gain of 0.75%.
Well, meantime, Karen, Bloomberg News has learned the president of China, Xi Jinping, plans to skip next week's Group of 20 summit in New Delhi. That would be a further blow to the host, India Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Tensions between the world's two most populous countries already threaten to prevent G20 leaders from issuing a joint communique for the first time since the forum was created in 1999.
Well, Nathan, when it comes to critics of China in Washington, Nancy Pelosi has been one of the toughest, and the former House Speaker is not mincing words about China's economic policies.
China has been a violator of transferring technology of weapons of mass destruction to rogue countries, A. B, in terms of economics, they've been violated almost every trade standard of access, of piracy, obeying WTA rules.
At the same time, former Speaker Pelosi says the U.S. and China need to find ways to work together because while they might not have shared values, they have a shared planet. Pelosi spoke with Bloomberg's Francine Lacqua for an upcoming edition of Leaders with Lacqua. Hear more of that interview coming up a little later in our program.
In corporate news this morning, Karen, Tesla is cutting prices in China and the U.S. as Elon Musk tries to boost sales. The EV maker has also unveiled the first refresh of its popular Model 3 sedan.
Well, Nathan, as we approach the 3-year anniversary of the onset of the coronavirus pandemic, Wall Street is still struggling to get workers back to the office. Bloomberg's John Tucker joins us with the latest. John.
And Karen, fewer than half of all office workers are back at their desks. That's according to Castle Systems, which measures badge swipes at office buildings around the country. In New York, where 1 in 11 jobs have ties to the financial securities industry, that figure slips to 43%. Among financial services workers who still work remotely, at least part-time, 2/3 said they would quit if they were required to return to the office 5 days a week. That's according to a recent Deloitte survey. Now, against this backdrop, Goldman Sachs is repeating the message it expects employees to be in the office 5 days a week. Later this month, BlackRock will tighten its in-office requirements from 3 days a week to 4. In New York, I'm John Tucker, Bloomberg Daybreak.
Back at your office. Thank you, John. Well, there's a new development in the U.S. Virgin Islands lawsuit against J.P. Morgan Chase over its ties to Jeffrey Epstein. A court filing shows the bank flagged more than $1 billion in suspicious transactions to the Treasury Department after the disgraced financier's death. The U.S. Virgin Islands says that enormous sum shows J.P. Morgan ignored red flags and knowingly benefited from Epstein's crimes.
Well, let's check some stocks on the move this morning. Nathan, shares of Broadcom down more than 4.5%. One of the world's 5 biggest chip makers gave a disappointing forecast for the current period. We get the story from Bloomberg's Charlie Pellet.
It signals that demand for electronic components remains sluggish. Broadcom said revenue will be about $9.27 billion in the fiscal fourth quarter. That compares with an average Wall Street estimate of $9.28 billion, with some analysts predicting as much as $9.8 billion. The outlook shows that Broadcom is mired in a broad spending slowdown, even as the artificial intelligence boom fuels demand in pockets of the industry. In New York, Charlie Pellet, Bloomberg Daybreak.
All right, Charlie, thanks. Another chip maker's moving in the opposite direction this morning. Shares of Intel are up more than 2%. CEO Pat Gelsinger says the chip maker is on course to hit its third quarter forecast. Intel says it's being helped by an improving personal computer market.
Well, Nathan Dell's shares are up 9%. The company reported better than expected sales of personal computers and data center hardware. Dell also says demand for products that help businesses use artificial intelligence are, quote, long-term tailwind. And time now for a look at some of the other stories making news around the world. For that, we're joined by Bloomberg's Amy Morris. Amy, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. President Biden is traveling to Florida tomorrow to survey the damage from Hurricane Idalia. Homeland Security Advisor Elizabeth Sherwood-Randall says the president is now prioritizing recovery efforts.
He has directed us to ensure that we have a fully coordinated whole-of-government effort to support people in the aftermath of this storm.
Some 1,500 federal responders are already on the ground in Florida. Record numbers of migrant families crossed the U.S.-Mexico border in August. Data obtained by the Washington Post show the Border Patrol arrested at least 91,000 migrants who crossed as part of a family group last month, exceeding the record set in May of 2019 of more than 84,000. Border apprehensions have risen more than 30% for 2 consecutive months. The numbers fly in the face of Biden administration efforts to discourage parents from illegally entering the U.S. with their children and could once again place immigration in the spotlight during a presidential race. Meanwhile, Massachusetts Governor Maura Healey is activating the National Guard to help provide basic services at some of the hotels being used as emergency shelters for migrants. Governor Healey says the National Guard will help families get food, transportation, housing, medical care, and education. Daniel Faria is one of the state's biggest family shelter providers.
I don't think it's enough for a long-term response, but I think it's a great short-term response.
Daniel Faria says she's glad the providers are seeing what shelters are having to deal with. Governor Healey declared a state of emergency over the migrant crisis earlier this summer. Now, in Maui, the mayor has released a video detailing what he knew and when on the day wildfires killed at least 115 people. Mayor Richard Bisson says in that video, he's been in the emergency operating center since August 7th.
I became aware of fatalities in the morning of August 9th, which I shared with the lieutenant governor's team. The realization that we had lost lives was devastating.
Bisson has been facing criticism and calls to resign. Meanwhile, the number of people missing in Maui is expected to fall down into the double digits. Officials are preparing a big update for it later today. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg. Karen.
All right, Amy, thank you. Now for the Bloomberg Sports Update with John Stashower. John.
Karen, it's a big holiday weekend of college football. The entire preseason top 25 will be playing, starting with last night's game. 14th-ranked Utah hosting the Florida Gators, and the Utes scored a 70-yard touchdown pass on their first play from scrimmage, and they were not done there.
Now Bernard back into the backfield with him. 4 pass catchers in the pattern. Nate backpedals, takes the snap, hands it off, keeps it on the edge. 25-20, Nate Johnson 15, Nate Johnson 10, Nate Johnson 5, end zone! Touchdown! 27 yards! The elusiveness, the speed of Nate Johnson into the end zone for a Utah touchdown.
Learfield the call. Utah beat Florida 24-11. Wake Forest over Elon 37-17. NC State won at UConn 24-14. And Nebraska's first game under new coach Matt Rule, Minnesota kicked a field goal on the final play and won 13-10. A bit of old-timers day at the U.S. Open. 36-year-old Andy Murray got trounced by Grigor Dimitrov. 38-year-old Stan Wawrinka won his match, and 38-year-old John Isner blew a 2-set lead and lost to fellow American Michael Mmoh, and that ends Isner's career after 17 years on the tour. Baseball, the Giants won at San Diego 7-2. The Nationals had only 3 hits, lost at home to Miami 6-1. Top 2 teams in the National League started a series in L.A. The Braves beat the Dodgers 8-7. Ronald Acuna hit a grand slam. John Stashower, Bloomberg Sports.
From coast to coast, from New York to San Francisco, Boston to Washington, D.C., nationwide on SiriusXM, the Bloomberg Business app, and Bloomberg.com. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager. Former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is weighing in on growing tensions with China. A longtime critic of the Chinese government, Pelosi says the U.S. and China lack shared values, but she says the world's 2 largest economies need to continue to find common ground for the good of both nations and for the planet. Nancy Pelosi sat down with Bloomberg's Francine Lacqua in Venice, Italy, for an upcoming episode of Bloomberg Television's Leaders with Lacqua program. They discussed geopolitics, Donald Trump, and the upcoming presidential election. Let's go to part of that conversation.
There's a certain element of the population who will just go for him. They're people we would probably never get. They don't share our values in terms of respect for the dignity and worth of every person and the rest. But there are some who are supporting him who are just afraid. They don't see a place for their families in the future. They're concerned about globalization. They're concerned about immigration. They're concerned about innovation. They're concerned about diversity, women, minorities, LGBTQ, other people coming into the leadership arena, and they and that's to be respected. So I respect all of the people of America, and when people ask me, are you afraid of what might happen? I say no, because of the goodness of the American people, the strength of our democracy, we will prevail.
Is there a Republican president, a candidate that you could live with?
I'm not into Republicans. I'm into the Democrats, and hopefully the Republican Party can find a candidate that America can live with. I say to the Republicans all the time, take back your party. The Republican Party is a great party. You've done great things for our country. You're not a cult to a thug. You're a great, grand, old party. And recapture that, because America needs a strong Republican Party. A strong Democratic Party too, but a strong Republican Party. So hopefully, as soon as we get through this, shall we say, cancerous situation that we're in, the malignancy of Trump, they will emerge in a strong way with the leadership that I know is there in the Republican Party. Not necessarily in the Congress, but in the country.
When you look at geopolitics, what scares you the most?
Well, in foreign affairs, anytime any of us travels abroad or receives dignitaries from overseas or grassroots activists, whoever it is, there are 3 things. One is security. Secondly is economics. How do we relate economically? Because that's the strength of all of our countries, to do so in a shared manner. And governance. Governance. What is the strength of the democracy in your country? How do you treat people and respect them? What is the integrity of your economic system? So those are the how we relate as Americans going abroad. On security, what is happening in Ukraine is a challenge to democracy, not just there, not just in the EU, NATO countries, but really to the world. And what a tribute to democracy that the courage of the Ukrainian people are. What's frightening is that Putin does not share any values of democracy, of justice, of respect for the lives of people, concern for children or anything. He's frightening, but it's doubly frightening is a person like the former president who thinks that's okay. Well, isn't that sad? But it's so sad and it's so extreme that it's everything to me is not frightening, but an opportunity.
An opportunity, but when you look at China, for example, if you look at what the U.S. has been doing with China and how they should treat China going forward.
Well, China's a big country, and so are we, and we have to find an accommodation on how we treat each other. But in terms of the 3 things I named, security, China has been a violator of transferring technology of weapons of mass destruction to rogue countries, A. B, in terms of economics, they've been violated almost every trade standard of access, of piracy, obeying WTA rules and the rest. And in terms of governance, what need I tell you, Hong Kong, Tibet, Uyghurs, threat to Taiwan, and the rest. So we don't have shared values, but we have a shared planet, right. And we have to work with the Chinese to save the planet, because they're now, I think, the biggest emitter. If not us, they're second, and they're part of the solution in all this.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Today, your morning brief on the stories making news from Wall Street to Washington and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed at 6 a.m. Eastern each morning on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning starting at 5 a.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington, Bloomberg 106.1 in Boston, and Bloomberg 960 in San Francisco.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Plus, listen coast to coast on the Bloomberg Business app, Sirius XM Channel 119, the iHeartRadio app, and on Bloomberg.com. I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak.